Yes, Socrates, as far as the argument is concerned, one of them is the same as the other. From the senses, then, is derived the knowledge that all sensible things aim at an absolute equality of which they fall short? Yes. Then, before we began to see or hear or perceive in any way, we must have had a knowledge of absolute equality, or we could not have referred to that standard the equals which are derived from the senses. For to that they all aspire, and of that they fall short. No other inference can be drawn from the previous statements. And did we not see and hear and have the use of our other senses as soon as we were born? Certainly. Then we must have acquired that knowledge of equality at some previous time. Yes, that is to say, before we were born, I suppose. True. And if we acquired this knowledge before we were born, and were born having the use of it, then we also knew before we were born and at the instant of birth not only the equal or the greater or the less, but all other ideas. For we are not speaking only of equality, but of beauty, goodness, justice, holiness, and of all which we stamp with the name of essence in the dialectical process, both when we ask and when we answer questions. Of all this, we may certainly affirm that we acquired our knowledge before birth. We may, but if, after having acquired, we have not forgotten what in each case we acquired, then we must always have come into life having knowledge, and shall always continue to know as long as life lasts. For knowing is the acquiring and retaining knowledge, and not forgetting. Is not forgetting, Simmias, just the losing of knowledge? Quite true, Socrates. But if the knowledge which we acquired before birth was lost by us at birth, and if afterwards by the use of the senses we recovered what we previously knew, will not that process which we call learning be a recovering of the knowledge which is natural to us, and may not thus be rightly termed recollection? Very true. So much is clear that when we perceive something, either by the help of sight or hearing or some other sense, from that perception we are able to obtain a notion of some other thing, like or unlike, which is associated with it but has been forgotten. Whence, as I was saying, one of two alternatives follows. Either we had this knowledge at birth and continued to know through life, or after birth, those who are said to learn only remember, and learning is simply recollection. Yes, that is quite true, Socrates. And which alternative, Simmias, do you prefer? Had we the knowledge at our birth, or did we recollect the things which we knew previously to our birth? I cannot decide at the moment. At any rate, you can decide whether he who has knowledge will or will not be able to render an account of his knowledge. What do you say? Certainly, he will. But Do you think that every man is able to give an account of these very matters about which we are speaking? Would that they could, Socrates, but I rather fear that tomorrow, at this time, there will no longer be anyone alive who is able to give an account of them such as ought to be given. Then you are not of opinion, Simmias, that all men know these things? Certainly not. They are in process of recollecting that which they learned before? Certainly. But when did our souls acquire this knowledge? Not since we were born as men? Certainly not. And therefore, previously? Yes. Then, Simmias, our souls must also have existed without bodies before they were in the form of men, and must have had intelligence. Unless indeed you suppose, Socrates, that these notions are given us at the very moment of birth, for this is the only time which remains. Yes, my friend, but if so, when do we lose them? For they are not in us when we are born, that is admitted. Do we lose them at the moment of receiving them, or if not, at what other time? No, Socrates, I perceive that I was unconsciously talking nonsense. Then may we not say, Simmias, that if, as we are always repeating, there is an absolute beauty and goodness and an absolute essence of all things, and if to this which is now discovered to have existed in our former state, we refer all our sensations, and with this compare them, finding these ideas to be pre-existent and our inborn possession, then our souls must have had a prior existence, but if not, there would be no force in the argument. There is the same proof that these ideas must have existed before we were born, and as that our souls existed before we were born, and if not the ideas, then not the souls. Yes, Socrates, I am convinced that there is precisely the same necessity for the one as for the other, and the argument retreats successfully to the position that the existence of the soul before birth cannot be separated from the existence of the essence of which you speak, for there is nothing which to my mind is so patent as that beauty, goodness, and the other notions of which you were just now speaking have a most real and absolute existence, and I am satisfied with that proof. Well, but is Cebes equally satisfied? For I must convince him too. I think, said Simmias, that Cebes is satisfied, although he is the most incredulous of mortals. Yet I believe that he is sufficiently convinced of the existence of the soul before birth, but that after death the soul will continue to exist is not yet proven even to my own satisfaction. I cannot get rid of the feeling of the many to which Cebes was referring, the feeling that when the man dies, the soul will be dispersed, and that this may be the extension of her, for admitting that she may have been born elsewhere and framed out of other elements and was in existence before entering the human body. why after having entered in and gone out again, may she not herself be destroyed and come to an end? Very true, Simmias, said Cebes. About half of what was required has been proven, to wit, that our souls existed before we were born, that the soul will exist after death as well as before birth is the other half of which the proof is still wanting and has to be supplied. When that is given, that demonstration will be complete. But that proof, Simmias and Cebes, has been already given, said Socrates. If you put the two arguments together, I mean this and the former one, in which we admitted that everything living is born of the death, for if the soul exists before birth, and in coming to life and being born can be born only from death and dying, must she not after death continue to exist, since she has to be born again? Surely the proof which you desire has been already furnished. Still I suspect that you and Simmias would be glad to prove the argument further. Like children, you are haunted with a fear that when the soul leaves the body, the wind may really blow her away and scatter her, especially if a man should happen to die in a great storm and not when the sky is calm. Cebes answered with a smile. Then, Socrates, you must argue us out of our fears, and yet, strictly speaking, they are not our fears, but there is a child within us to whom death is a sort of hobgoblin. Him too we must persuade not to be afraid when he is alone in the dark. Socrates said, let the voice of the charmer be applied daily until you have charmed away the fear. And there shall we find a good charmer of our fears, Socrates, when you are gone. Hellas, he replied, is a large place, Cebes, and has many good men, and there are barbarous races not a few. Seek for him among them all, afar as and wide, sparing neither pains nor money, for there is no better way of spending your money, and you must seek among yourselves too, for you will not find others better able to make the search. The search, replied Cebes, shall certainly be made. And now, if you please, let us return to the point of the argument at which we digressed. By all means, replied Socrates. What else should I please? Very good. Must we not, said Socrates, ask ourselves what that is which, as we imagine, is liable to be scattered, and about which we fear, and what again is that about which we have no fear? And then we may proceed further to inquire whether that which suffers dispersion is or is not of the nature of soul. Our hopes and fears as to our own souls will turn upon the answers to these questions. Very true, he said. Now the compound or composite may be supposed to be naturally capable, as of being compounded, so also of being dissolved. But that which is uncompounded, and that only, must be, if anything is, indissoluble. Yes, I should imagine so, said Cebes, and the uncompounded may be assumed to the same and unchanging, whereas the compound is always changing and never the same. I agree, he said. Then now let us return to the previous discussion. Is that idea or essence, which in the dialectical process we define as essence or true existence, whether essence of equality, beauty, or anything else, are this essence, I say, liable at times to some degree of change? Or are they each of them always what they are, having the same simple self existence and unchanging forms, not admitting of variation at all, or in any way, or at any time? They must be always the same. Socrates, replied Cebes. And what would you say of the many beautiful, whether men or horses or garments or any other things which are named by the same names and may be called equal or beautiful? Are they all unchanging and the same always, or quite the reverse? May they not rather be described as almost always changing and hardly ever the same, either with themselves or with one another? The latter, replied Cebes. They are always in a state of change, and this you can touch and see and perceive with the senses, but the unchanging things you can only perceive with the mind. They are invisible and are not seen. That is very true, he said. Well then, added Socrates, let us suppose that there are two sorts of existences, one seen, the other unseen. Let us suppose them. The seen is the changing, and the unseen is the unchanging. That may be also supposed. And further, is not one part of us body, another part soul? To be sure. And to which class is the body more alike and akin? Clearly to the seen. No one can doubt that. And is the soul seen or not seen? Not by man, Socrates. And what we mean by seen and not seen is that which is or is not visible to the eye of man. Yes, to the eye of man. And is the soul seen or not seen? Not seen. Unseen then? Yes. Then the soul is more like to the unseen and the body to the seen. That follows necessarily, Socrates. And were we not saying long ago that the soul, when using the body as an instrument of perception, that is to say, when using the sense of sight or hearing or some other sense, for the meaning of perceiving through the body is perceiving through the senses, we were not saying that the soul too is then dragged by the body into the region of the changeable, and wanders and is confused. The world spins round her, and she is like a drunk cart when she touches change. Very true. But when returning into herself, she reflects, when then she passes into the other world, the region of purity and eternity and immortality and unchangeableness, which are her kindred, and with them she ever lives, when she is by herself and is not let or hindered. Then she ceases from her erring ways, and being in communion with the unchanging is unchanging, and this state of the soul is called wisdom. That is well and truly said, Socrates, he replied. And to which class is the soul more nearly alike and akin, as far as may be inferred from this argument, as well as from the preceding one? I think, Socrates, that in the opinion of every one who follows the argument, the soul will be infinitely more like the unchangeable. Even the most stupid person will not deny that. And the body is more like the changing. Yes, yet once more consider the matter in another light. When the soul and the body are united, then nature orders the soul to rule and govern, and the body to obey and serve. Now, which of these two functions is akin to the divine, and which to the mortal? Does not the divine appear to you to be that which naturally orders and rules, and the mortal to be that which is subject and servant? True. And which does the soul resemble? The soul resembles the divine, and the body the mortal. There can be no doubt of that, Socrates. Then reflect, Cebes. Of all which has been said, is not this the conclusion, that the soul is in the very likeness of the divine, and immortal, and intellectual, and uniform, and indissoluble, and unchangeable, and that the body is the very likeness of the human, and mortal, and unintellectual, and multiform, and dissoluble, and changeable? Can this, my dear Cebes, be denied? It cannot. But if it be true, then is not the body liable to speedy dissolution? And is not the soul almost or altogether indissoluble? Certainly. And do you further observe that after a man is dead, the body or invisible part of him, which is lying in the visible world and is called a corpse, and would naturally be dissolved and decomposed and dissipated, it is not dissolved or decomposed at once, but may remain for some time, nay, even for a long time, if the constitution be sound at the time of death, and the season of the year favorable. For the body, when shrunk and embalmed, as the manner is in Egypt, may remain almost entire through infinite ages, and even in decay there are still some portions, such as the bones and ligaments, which are practically indestructible. Do you agree? Yes. And is it likely that the soul, which is invisible, in passing to the place of the true Hades, which like her is invisible and pure and noble, and on her way to the good and wise God, whither, if God will, my soul is also soon go? That the soul, I repeat, if this be her nature and origin, will be blown away and destroyed immediately on quitting the body. And the many say, that can never be, my dear Simmias and Cebes. The truth rather is that the soul which is pure at departing and draws after her no bodily taint, having never voluntarily during life had connection with the body, which she is ever avoiding, herself gathered into herself, and making such abstraction her perpetual study, which means that she has been a true disciple of philosophy, and therefore has in fact been always engaged in the practice of dying. For is not philosophy the study of death? Certainly, that soul, I say, herself invisible, departs to the invisible world, to the divine and immortal and rational. Thither arriving, she is secure of bliss and is released from the error and folly of man, their fears and wild passions, and all other human ills, and forever dwells, as they say of the initiated, in the company with the gods. Is not this true, Sebes? Yes, said Sebes, beyond a doubt. But the soul which has been polluted and is impure at the time of the departure, and is the companion and servant of the body always, and is in love with and fascinated by the body and by the desires and pleasures of the body, until she is led to believe that the truth only exists in a bodily form, which a man may touch and see and taste and use for the purposes of his lusts. The soul, I mean, accustomed to hate and fear and avoid the intellectual principle, which to be the bodily eye is dark and invisible and can be attained only by philosophy. Do you suppose that such a soul will depart pure and unalloyed? Impossible, he replied. She is held fast by the corporeal, which the continual association and constant care of the body have wrought into her nature. Very true. And this corporeal element, my friend, is heavy and weighty and earthly, and is that element of sight by which a soul is depressed and dragged down again into the visible world, because she is afraid of the visible and of the world below, prowling about tombs and sepulchres, near which, as they tell us, are seen certain ghostly apparitions of souls which have not departed pure, but are cloyed with sight and therefore visible. That is very likely, Socrates. Yes, that is very likely, Cebes. And this must be the souls, not of the good, but of the evil, which are compelled to wander about such places in payment of the penalty of their former evil way of life, and they continue to wander until through the craving after the corporeal which never leaves them, they are imprisoned finally in another body, and they may be supposed to find their presence in the same natures which they have had in their former lives. What natures do you mean, Socrates? What I mean is that men who have followed after gluttony and wantonness and drunkenness, and have had no thought of avoiding them, would pass into asses and animals of that sort. What do you think? I think such an opinion to be exceedingly probable, and those who have chosen the portion of injustice and tyranny and violence will pass into wolves or into hawks and kites, whither else can we suppose them to go? Yes, said Cebes, with such natures beyond question. And there is no difficulty, he said, in assigning to all of them places answering to their several natures and propensities. There is not, he said, some are happier than others, and the happiest both in themselves and in the place to which they go are those who have practiced the civil and social virtues which are called temperance and justice, and are acquired by habit and attention without philosophy and mind. Why are they the happiest? Because they may be expected to pass into some gentle and social kind which is like their own, such as bees or wasps or ants, or back again into the form of man, and just and moderate men may be supposed to spring from them. Very likely. No one who has not studied philosophy and who is not entirely pure at the time of his departure is allowed to enter the company of the gods, but the lover of knowledge only. And this is the reason, Simmias and Cebes, why the true votaries of philosophy abstain from all fleshly lusts, and hold out against them, and refuse to give themselves up to them, not because they fear poverty or the ruin of their families, like the lovers of money and the world in general, nor like the lovers of power and honor, because they dread that dishonor or disgrace of evil deeds. No, Socrates, that would not become them, said Cebes. No, indeed, he replied, and therefore they who have any care of their own souls and do not merely live moulding and fashioning the body, say farewell to all tests. They will not walk in the ways of the blind, and when philosophy offers them purification and release from evil, they feel that they ought not to resist her influence, and whither she leads, they turn and follow. What do you mean, Socrates? I will tell you, besaid. The lovers of knowledge are conscious that the soul was simply fastened and glued to the body. Until philosophy received her, she could only view real existence through the bars of a prison, and not in and through herself. She was wallowing in the mire of every sort of ignorance, and by reason of lust had become the principal accomplice in her own captivity. This was her original state, and then, as I was saying, and as the lovers of knowledge are well aware, philosophy, seeing how terrible was her confinement, of which she was to herself the cause, received and gently comforted her and sought to release her, pointing out that the eye and the ear and the other senses are full of deception, and persuading her to retire from them and abstain from all but the necessary use of them, and be gathered up and collected into herself, bidding her trust in herself and her own pure apprehension of pure existence, and to mistrust whatever comes to her through other channels and is subject to variation. For such things are visible and tangible, but what she sees in her own nature is intelligible and invisible. and the soul of the true philosopher thinks that she ought not to resist this deliverance, and therefore abstains from pleasures and desires and pains and fears as far as she is able, reflecting that when a man has great joys or sorrows or fears or desires, he suffers from them, not merely the sort of evil which might be anticipated, as for example, the loss of his health or property which he has sacrificed to his lusts, but an evil greater far, which is the greatest and worst of all evils, and one of which he never thinks. What is it, Socrates? Said Cebes. The evil is that when the feeling of pleasure or pain is most intense, every soul of man imagines the objects of these intense feelings to be then plainest and truest. But this is not so. They are really the things of sight. Very true. And is not this the state in which the soul is most enthralled in by the body? How so? Why, because each pleasure and pain is a sort of nail which nails and rivets the soul to the body until she becomes like the body and believes that to be true which the body affirms to be true, and from agreeing with the body and having the same delights, she is obliged to have the same habits and haunts, and is not likely ever to be pure at her departure to the world below, but is always infected by the body. And so she sinks into another body and there germinates and grows, and has therefore no part in the communion of the divine and pure and simple. Most true, Socrates, answered Cebes. And this, Cebes, is the reason why the true lovers of knowledge are temperate and brave, and not for the reason which the world gives. Certainly not. Certainly not. The soul of a philosopher will reason in quite another way. She will not ask philosophy to release her in order that when released she may deliver herself up again to the thraldom of pleasures and pains, doing a work only to be undone again, weaving instead of unweaving her Penelope's web. But she will calm patient and follow reason and dwell in the contemplation of her, beholding the true and divine, which is not matter of opinion, and thence deriving nourishment. Thus she seeks to live while she lives, and after death she hopes to go to her own kindred and to that which is like her, and to be freed from human ills. Never fear, Simmias and Cebes, that a soul which has been thus nurtured and has had these pursuits will at her departure from the body be scattered and blown away by the winds and be nowhere and nothing. When Socrates had done speaking, for a considerable time there was silence. He himself appeared to be meditating, as most of us were, on what had been said. Only Cebes and Simmias spoke a few words to one another, and Socrates, observing them, asked what they thought of the argument, and whether there was anything wanting. For, said he, There are many points still open to suspicion and attack. If anyone were disposed to sift the matter thoroughly, should you be considering some other matter, I say no more. But if you are still in doubt, do not hesitate to say exactly what you think, and let us have anything better which you can suggest. And if you think that I can be of any use, allow me to help you. Simmias said, I must confess, Socrates, that doubts did arise in our minds, and each of us was urging and inciting the other to put a question which we wanted to have answered, but which neither of us liked to ask, fearing that our importunity might be troublesome at such a time. Socrates replied with a smile, "O Simmias, what are you saying? I am not very likely to persuade other men that I do not regard my present situation as a misfortune, if I cannot even persuade you that I am no worse off now than at any other time in my life. Will you not allow that I have as much of the spirit of prophecy in me as the swans? For when they perceive that they must die, having sung all their life long, do then sing more lustily than ever, rejoicing in the thought that they are about to go away to the God whose ministers they are. But men, because they are themselves afraid of death, slanderously affirm of the swans that they sing a lament at the last, not considering that no bird sings when cold, or hungry, or in pain, not even in the nightingale, nor the swallow, nor yet the hoopoe, which are said indeed to chant a lay of sorrow, although I do not believe this to be true of them in any more than of the swans. But because they are sacred to Apollo, they have the gift of prophecy, and anticipate the good things of another world. Wherefore they sing and rejoice in that they more than ever they did before, and I too, believing myself to be consecrated servant of the same God, and the fellow servant of the swans, and thinking that I have received from my master gifts of prophecy, which are not inferior to theirs, would not go out of life less merrily than the swans. Never mind, then, if this be your only objection, but speak and ask anything which you like, while the 11 magistrates of Athens allow. Very good, Socrates, said Simmias. Then I will tell you my difficulty, and Cebes will tell you his. I feel myself, and I dare say that you have the same feeling. How hard, or rather impossible, is the attainment of any certainty about questions such as this in the present life. And yet I should deem him a coward who did not prove that what is said about them to the uttermost, or whose heart failed him before he had examined them on every side, for he should persevere until he has achieved one of two things. Either he should discover or be taught by the truth about them, or If this be impossible, I would have him take the best and most irrefragable of human theories, and let this be the raft upon which he sails through life, not without risk, as I admit, if he cannot find some word of God which will more surely and safely carry him. And now, as you bid me, I will venture to question you, and then I shall not have to reproach myself hereafter with not having said at the time what I think. For when I consider the matter, either alone or with Cebes, the argument does certainly appear to me, Socrates, to be not sufficient. Socrates answered, I dare say, my friend, that you may be right, but I should like to know in what respect the argument is insufficient. In this respect, replied Simmias, suppose a person to use the same argument about harmony and the lyre. Might he not say that harmony is a thing invisible, incorporeal, perfect, divine, existing in the lyre which is harmonized, but that the lyre has and the strings are matter and material, composite, earthly, and akin to mortality? And when someone breaks the lyre, or cuts and rents the strings, then he who takes this view would argue as you do, and on the same analogy, that the harmony survives and has not perished. You cannot imagine, he would say, that the lyre without the strings and the broken strings themselves, which are mortal, remain, and yet that the harmony, which is of heavenly and immortal nature and kindred, has perished before the mortal. The harmony must still be somewhere, and the wood and strings will decay before anything can happen to that. The thought, Socrates, must have occurred to your own mind that such is our conception of the soul, and that when the body is in a manner strong and held together by the elements of hot and cold, wet and dry, then the soul is the harmony or due proportionate admixture of them. But if so, whenever the strings of the body are unduly loosened or overstrained through disease or other injury, then the soul, though most divine, like other harmonies of music or works of art, of course perishes at once, although the material remains of the body may last for a considerable time, until they are either decayed or burned. And if any one maintains that the soul, being the harmony of elements of the body, is first to perish in that which is called death, how shall we answer him? Socrates looked fixedly at us as his manner was, and said with a smile, Simmias has reason on his side, and why does not some one of you who is better able than myself answer him? For there is force in his attack upon me. But perhaps, before we answer him, we had better also hear what Cebes has to say, that we may gain time for reflection, and when they have both spoken, we may either assent to them if there is truth in what they say, or if not, we will maintain our position. Please to tell me then, Sebes, he said, what was the difficulty which troubled you? Sebes said, I will tell you. My feeling is that the argument is where it was, and open to the same objections which we urged before. For I am ready to admit that the existence of the soul before entering into the bodily form has been very ingeniously, and, if I may say so, quite sufficiently proven. But the existence of the soul after death is still, in my judgment, unproven. Now my objection is not the same as that of Simmias, for I am not disposed to deny that the soul is stronger and more lasting than the body, being of opinion that in all such respects the soul very far excels the body. Well then, says the argument to me, why do you remain unconvinced? When you see that the weaker continues in existence after the man is dead, will you not admit that the more lasting must also survive during the same period of time? Now I will ask you to consider whether the objection, which, like Simmias, I will express in a figure, is of any weight. The analogy which I will adduce is that of an old weaver who dies, and after his death somebody says, he is not dead, he must be alive. See, there is the coat which he himself wove and wore, and which remains whole and undecayed. And then he proceeds to ask of someone who is incredulous whether a man lasts longer, or the coat which is in use and wear. And when he is answered that a man lasts far longer, thinks that he has thus certainly demonstrated the survival of the man who is the more lasting, because the less lasting remains. But that, Simmias, as I would beg you to remark, is a mistake. Anyone can see that he who talks thus is talking nonsense, for the truth is that the weaver aforesaid, having woven and worn many such coats, outlived several of them, and was outlived by the last. But a man is not therefore proved to be slighter and weaker than a coat. Now the relation of the body to the soul may be expressed in a similar figure, and anyone may very fairly say in like manner that the soul is lasting and the body weak and short-lived in comparison. He may argue in like manner that every soul wears out many bodies, especially if a man live many years. While he is alive, the body deliquesces and decays, and the soul always weaves another garment and repairs the waste. But of course, whenever the soul perishes, she must have on her last garment, and this will survive her. And then, at length, when the soul is dead, the body will show its native weakness and quickly decompose and pass away. I would therefore rather not rely on the argument from superior strength to prove the continued existence of the soul after death, for granting even more than you affirm to be possible, and acknowledging not only that the soul existed before birth, but also that the souls of some exist and will continue to exist after death, and will be born and die again and again, and that there is a natural strength in the soul which will hold out and be born many times. Nevertheless, we may be still inclined to think that she will weary in the labors of successive births, and may at last succumb in one of her deaths and utterly perish. And this death is an dissolution of the body which brings destruction to the soul may be unknown to any of us, for no one of us can have had any experience of it, and if so, then I maintain that he who is confident about that has but a foolish confidence, unless he is able to prove that the soul is altogether immortal and imperishable. But if he cannot prove the soul's immortality, he who is about to die will always have reason to fear that when the body is disunited, the soul is also may utterly perish. All of us, as we afterwards remarked to one another, had an unpleasant feeling at hearing what they say. When we had been so firmly convinced before, now to have our faith shaken seemed to introduce a confusion and uncertainty not only into the previous argument, but into any future one. Either we were incapable of forming a judgment, or there were no grounds of belief. Echecrates, there I feel with you, by heaven I do, Phaedo, and when you were speaking, I was beginning to ask myself the same question. What argument can I ever trust again? For what could be more convincing than the argument of Socrates, which has now fallen into discredit, that the soul is a harmony, is a doctrine which has always had a wonderful attraction for me, and when mentioned, came back to me at once as my own original conviction. And now I must begin again and find another argument which will assure me that when the man is dead, the soul survives. Tell me, I implore you, how did Socrates proceed? Did he appear to share the unpleasant feeling which you mentioned? Or did he calmly meet the attack? And did he answer forcibly or feebly? Narrate what passed as exactly as you can. Phaedo. Often, Echecrates, I have wondered at Socrates, but never more than on that occasion. That he should be able to answer was nothing, but what astonished me was, first, the gentle and pleasant and approving manner in which he received the words of the young man, and then his quick sense of the wound which had been inflicted by the argument, and the readiness with which he healed it. He might be compared to a general rallying his defeated and broken army, urging them to accompany him and return to the field of argument. Echecrates, what followed? Phaedo, you shall hear, for I was close to him on his right hand, seated on a sort of stool, and he on a couch which was a good deal higher. He stroked my head and pressed the hair upon my neck. He had a way of playing with my hair, and then he said, "Tomorrow, Phaedo, I suppose that these fair locks of yours will be severed." "Yes, Socrates, I suppose that they will," I replied. "Not so, if you will take my advice." "What shall I do with them?" I said. "Today," he replied, "and not tomorrow. If this argument dies, and we cannot bring it to life again, you and I will both shave our locks. And if I were you, and the argument got away from me, and I could not hold my ground against Simmias and Cebes, I would myself take an oath like the Argives not to wear hair any more until I had renewed the conflict and defeated them." "Yes," I said, "but Heracles himself is said not to be a match for two." "Summon me, then," he said, "and I will be your Iolaus until the sun goes down." "I summon you, rather," I rejoined, "not as Heracles summoning Iolaus, but as Iolaus might summon Heracles." "That will do as well," he said, "but first let us take care that we avoid a danger." "Of what nature?" I said.